Chapter 14 from Thunder Cave. I opened my eyes. It was dark out, and I was lying next to a small fire. I tried to raise my head and found that I couldn't. For a moment, I thought I was paralyzed. I flexed my fingers. They seemed to be working. I brought my hand to my face and touched it. I tried to move my head again and was able to get it about an inch off the ground. A searing pain shot through my neck and exploded in my head. I eased it back down, relieved that I could move it. I lifted my head and saw the faces of the Maasai from my dream. He looked concerned. "Who?" I began. "Quiet," the Maasai said. "You must rest." "Who?" I began again. "Please," he said. "No words. You must not speak. I will talk, but you must be quiet." He squatted next to me and cradled my head in his hand. "Drink a little." He put a gourd to my lips and let a small amount of water trickle into my mouth. It was a wonderful sensation. "That is enough for now," he said, taking the gourd away. He sat down across from me. "My name is Sapit," he said. "You have been here for 2 days. 2 days, I thought? How had 48 hours passed without my knowing it? Had I been lying here all that time? I found you in the river with the animals." I remembered the fire and the river. I also remembered floating above my body, the white light, the blue opening, my mother's voice. What was all of that about? What had happened to me? He continued. "I followed your bicycle tracks for 2 days. I was curious about you. A boy on a bike in the bush is the most unusual." Stupid would be another name for it, I thought. "When you are stronger," he said, "I will give you food. Until then, you must rest and gather your strength." I closed my eyes and drifted off. Images began to appear. My mother in her coffin, the boxes in our apartment, my father walking through Central Park, tall, sitting by the stream, the amulet, floating above Africa, the cave. It was like a crazy slideshow of unrelated events, but they were all somehow connected. Like road signs, they seemed to be leading me somewhere. It was light out, and I knew it was late afternoon because of the intense heat. I felt stronger, and with some effort I was able to sit up. The Maasai was nowhere to be seen. I had a vague recollection that he told me his name, but I couldn't remember what it was. I looked around the camp, which was in a small grove of charred trees. I thought about getting up and looking for my bicycle and gear, but my body wouldn't cooperate. I guess I wouldn't be running around for a while. I was sore, but my stomach and bowels actually felt like they were on the mend. In fact, I realized I was actually hungry. The Maasai appeared from behind the trees and walked into camp. When he saw me sitting up, his face broke into a smile. "You are better," he said. I managed to smile, a little smile in return. "Yeah, I guess." Over his shoulder, he carried the hind quarter of a small antelope. He dropped it by the fire. "You must be thirsty." "Yes," I said, "and hungry." A water gourd hung from the leather strap slung over his shoulder. He took it off and handed it to me. "First you must drink," he said. "Drink slowly and only a small amount." I took out the stopper and put the gourd to my lips, but I didn't drink. I wonder where he had gotten the water. All I needed was another case of diarrhea. The first bout had almost killed me. "Drink," he said. "I don't mean to be impolite," I said, "but where did this water come from?" The question surprised him. "From the river," he said. "I'm not sure I can drink it." He looked down at me and smiled. "You've been drinking it for 2 days." I still wasn't convinced. "I have water purification tablets with my gear," I said. "It takes bacteria out of the water so I won't get sick." I was certain that he wouldn't understand this. I was wrong. He laughed and said, "The water is good. I have added my own purification." Strung to his belt was a small leather bag. He took this off and opened it. Inside was some fine brown powder. "Go ahead," he said. "Taste it." I dipped my finger into the bag and put it in my mouth. It was sweet. "What is it?" I asked. "The bark of a tree and some dried plants," he said. "We use it for many things. It is good for your health, like a vitamin. Drink." I believed him. I tipped the gourd back and felt the cool water flow down my throat. It sure tasted good. "We will eat," he said, sitting down near the hind quarter. What is it? Thompson's gazelle. Did you kill it with your spear? No, he said. I borrowed it. What do you mean, borrowed it? When you are stronger, I will show you what I mean, he said. I wondered if he'd gotten it out of the riverbed. The meat couldn't be good after all these days. My body isn't used to what your body is used to, I said. It will be soon, he said, and picked up the hindquarter. He drew a knife from the sheath beneath his shuka and expertly stripped the skin from the leg. He sharpened both ends of the stick and ran it lengthwise through the meat of the leg. He jammed one end into the ground near the fire and leaned the stick over the coals. I forgot your name, I said. Sapit. And you're Masai? Yes, he said. I dreamed that I was floating above you in the riverbed, I said. That was not a dream. It had to be, I insisted. What else did you see? He asked. I told him about the cave and the petroglyph that looked like my snake amulet. May I see the snake? May I see the amulet? I took it off and handed it to him. He looked at it carefully in light of the fire. Where did you get this? It's from the Hopi Indian tribe, I told him. It belonged to my grandfather. It is very interesting, he said, handing it back. What is your name? Jacob Lanza. And are you Hopi? Half, I said. You know about the Hopi? I have read about them, yes. I was startled by this. Your English is great. Where did you learn it? In a mission, then in Nairobi, and later, university, he said. You look surprised. I am. I have a master's degree in psychology, he said. But why? First, he interrupted, tell me about yourself. What brings you to Kenya? I told him about my mother and my father, Sam, my grandfather, Nebraska, the diarrhea, the fire, everything. While I talked, he didn't take his eyes off me. He seemed very interested in my story. When I finished, he continued to look at me in silence. I grew uncomfortable in his steady gaze. By now, the meat was sizzling over the fire and smelled wonderful. My mouth began to water. Finally, he said, perhaps you are here for other reasons aside from seeing your father. I thought about this for a moment. If there were other reasons, I didn't know what they were. What, for instance? I asked. It is difficult to know at this point, he said, taking the stick from the fire. With his knife, he sliced a piece of meat and handed it to me. I ate it greedily. It was incredible. We both ate for a while without talking. After I finished my third piece of meat, I asked him what he was doing out here. I belong here, he said. I don't understand. He laughed. I'm not sure that I understand either, he said. There are many things that I don't understand, and there are many things that you don't understand. I couldn't argue with him on that issue. It seemed like the older I got, the less I understood what was going on. When I was a child, he said, I wanted to go to the mission school. I did well in school, and because of this, I was sent to other schools in the city. When I finished school in Nairobi, I returned to my corral. My family was not the same, nor were the other Maasai. They had lost their way. They opened the corral to tourists who took pictures and wandered around our homes. The cattle herd was now for show. Instead of watching the cattle, the youngsters watched for dust from the tourist minivans, and the girls would go out into the road with their bare breasts and entice the vans to stop at the corral. The drivers paid the village money to let the tourists in. The tourists were the new cattle and sheep, and we lost our connection with the land. I discovered that there was something missing from my life, and perhaps from the life of the Maasai. I traveled until I found a tribe of people that still lived in the traditional way. They accepted me, and I lived as they lived for more than a year. They taught me about what was missing. And what was that? I asked. A sense of community, he said. Sapit stood up and gathered more wood for the fire. I'd been so engrossed in what he was saying that I hadn't noticed that the sun had set. He put the wood on the fire and sat back down. Why did you leave that tribe if you were happy there? Because they're not my people. I came back here. There are still a few who believe in the old ways. Not as many as there used to be, but some. I wanted to see what I could do to bring my people back to the land. I asked him what he meant by the old days. The Maasai have many traditions, he said. For example, when the cattle are happy, so are the Maasai. We wandered with the cattle. The cattle led us to places we hadn't been before. So in a sense, the cattle are our leaders. Traditionally, the Maasai like nothing better than to watch the cattle grazing on green grass. We take pleasure in looking at their bodies, watching the swish of their tail and the tossing of their heads. We find beauty in the smallest detail of their behavior and write songs and poems and dance in honor of them. The cattle are good and useful, and we are happy that they are in our lives. When we look at them, we see a power greater than ours. I told him about my brief visit to the Maasai corral and the poor condition of the cattle I saw there. Yes, he said, many cattle have died, but there is good in the drought. It has brought some of the people back to the old ways. Seeing the death and suffering has brought a few Maasai back to themselves. He paused for a moment, picked up a stick from the fire, and looked at the flame. Some Maasai believe they have lost our spirit, and therefore we are being punished. Do you believe this? Yes, he said. Bad luck is always brought on by a failure of the spirit of one kind or another. What did you mean by community? I asked. Community is as important as food, shelter, and water, he said. Without community, there is little use for the other necessities of life. Technology brings comfort, but it can also undermine our dealings with people. Some might look at me and say that I have nothing, but if I have community, I have everything. I shook my head. I was still confused. Community is not just people, he said. It is everything around you. You think that you've seen Kenya, but Kenya has seen more of you than you have of it. You've ridden over the land, but you have not seen it. But who has time to see it this way? I asked. Those who take the time, he said. I thought about this as he put more sticks on the fire, then realized that I hadn't thanked him for saving my life. If you hadn't found me, I said, I would have died. He shrugged his shoulders. Who's to say that would have happened? You are young and you have a mission. A goal makes one strong. It is a tool that can be used to help you through the bad times. I don't think it was a goal that saved my life, I said. It was you. Perhaps, he said. So what's your goal, Sapit? To make it rain, he said. You're trying to make it rain now? I'm fulfilling what must be done until I arrive at the place where the rains are made. And where's that? He pointed south. There's only one man who knows exactly where it is. He is an old Maasai named Sitanik, Alabion. Alabion? I asked. A spiritual leader to the Maasai, an enchanter, witch doctor, sorcerer. It means many different things. I must see Sitanik. If the long rains fail, the cattle will die, and so will the Maasai. Why you? I asked. It is why I am here, he said. Your purpose? One of them. And you believe that you can make it rain? I believe you can make anything happen if you truly believe that it will happen. He looked up at the sky. It is dark and the cicada are out. In the Maasai land, we say that the day is for the people and the night is for the wild animals. It's time to sleep. He curled up next to the fire and closed his eyes. I looked at him for a long time. My mind raced with questions. Sapit? He opened his eyes. Will you help me find my father's camp? He smiled, then closed his eyes again without answering my question.